King, Mike Garcia, Mike McDermott, and Shamali. Good to see you. Your name at least, and Walter. And let's see.
I got around the problem, John. I got on.
Okay, good.
I'm here also. This is Bill Penniman.
Hi, Bill. I saw you. I just saw you there. Okay, why don't we start? And Burton isn't here. A roll call by scrolling through here. So could I have a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
I make a motion to approve the agenda.
Thank you, Gary. Is there a second?
Second.
Who's
Second.
that? David? Was that you?
Yeah.
Anybody opposed? Okay, thank you. Could I have a motion to approve the minutes of the March the 2nd meeting?
So moved.
Thank you, Jan.
I second that.
Thank you, Gary. Anybody opposed? Okay, we'll consider it unanimous. So tonight we have a full agenda, not a whole lot of agenda items, but a full agenda. And I would like to begin with a preview of item 7. And I'm sorry that I botched my first try at it, but I resent a corrected version today, which I hope I didn't botch. And I'll note only 2 things. That our goal is to produce what I'm now calling our initial public draft. That is, it's not just internal to our group, but it's totally shared with the full task force. I'm hoping that we will do that at our next meeting, which is March the 30th. It is for discussion at the April the 12th meeting of the task force. And then we hope to conclude all of this with a, we hope to deliver the final draft to the task force on April the 21st. And we hope to have at the task force's April 26th meeting, a final approval of it. And then if the creeks, good Lord willing, and the creeks don't overflow, we'll be done with our task. Okay, so we'll that's what we have. So it's going to be a lot of intense work, and I really appreciate all the effort that folks have put into it. So, but that's our goal. Does that make sense? Okay,
That's fine. John, I'll just note, and I may be the only one in this predicament, but spring break for area schools is the week of the 29th, I think, and I'm going to be out of town that week.
okay.
Doesn't necessarily matter, but I'll just, in case others, I know some of the staff have kids in the system as well, so.
Gotcha. Well, yeah, it will be a less rich conversation without you, Mark. But perhaps you can give all of your comments today and then prior to the 29th. Okay, that would help.
Fair enough.
Okay. I'm just going to note that you're absent then. Okay. So the first thing we want to do is item number 4, which is a presentation on something that I have called, and the presenters will decide if it's not a nonsense name, but Reston mobility metrics. So we've talked about the limitations of the LOS, or level of service metric. So I met initially with Scott and Nigel and John King and John King, and I said John Garcia. I met Mike Garcia in the minutes there, or the agenda. And then they took over from there. So I'm looking forward to their presentation tonight and our discussion. And John King, do I understand you're the presenter?
Yep, that's right. I'll be leading the presentation, but certainly others are welcome to speak up or contribute any thoughts or comments.
Just a question, was there a handout on this one already, or was this just the presentation? Okay, thanks.
Yep. So, thank you. Lisa, can you provide me with presenter?
I thought I did.
Oh, you already. I think you already did. Yep. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay. I should be sharing my screen.
And
Can see that?
John, you'll share this with us after the meeting?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Okay. Is that working?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, as John mentioned, we had I think a really good discussion early last week. It was a follow-up to talk about metrics that are used in transportation analyses and planning processes. And I think earlier the task force had some discussion about level of service. It's a bit of a controversial metric these days. But anyway, so the result of that, I think, very good conversation was this discussion about modal balance. Metrics are really tools in a toolbox. They're what we use to measure things. I mean, as the name implies, but they're not the be all and end all at all in any way of the decision making process. They help inform decision makers and the community members about conditions, both existing and in the future. So with that in mind, and following up on that conversation we had early last week, modal balance is sort of the theme of tonight's very brief presentation. So I'll go ahead and get into it. And like I said, anyone else that would like to, please feel free to chime in. So as you all are headed down the home stretch, this is just another sort of reminder about the work that you're doing. It's visioning. It's long range planning. I've heard a number of folks, and obviously the one transportation chapter would lead you to think about a one Reston. So as you're doing your visioning work and thinking about the future for Restonians and the transportation network, just keep that in mind, the one Reston concept. And as you do your work, we ask as staff, when we look at the comprehensive plan, when developers look at the comprehensive plan, having the community's guidance and rationale on their modal options is very helpful. Giving that context, so you understand why things are recommended and why the community would like to see things, I think is very helpful. So having that guidance in there would be great. So we've said a few times, modal balance, what that means. I guess to me, it's really understanding that when you do provide emphasis towards one or multiple transportation modes, there's this balancing act that you have to go through. So let's say you're looking to emphasize. I'm giving examples. A rapid transit system that could include taking away a travel lane, which would reduce your capacity on a roadway. It could mean longer crossing times, or you might have to be held in the median for pedestrians. So that's one example. There's lots of examples about when you make decisions to emphasize one mode over another. As we make improvements and developments come online, we have to try and balance all these different modes. So the guidance you give helps us understand the community's desired preferences or priorities, however you want to say it, the emphasis that you're providing in the plan, and then we'll work towards balancing these different modes so that they do function in an acceptable manner. So how do we go about doing that? We have gotten started in Reston with establishing what we're calling, I think, the Reston Transportation Data Hub. It's a new product. It's just coming online, but I think there's a lot of good information there. Excuse me. As I mentioned earlier, the way we measure things and the analytical tools, they're really one input among many in the decision-making process. So just keep that in mind, that just because, X plus Y equals Z, that doesn't mean you get some end product. So anyway, with this Reston Transportation Data Hub, we do have a data collection program online. That's something you want to do, is you do want to ground truth, what your assumptions are. So you collect the data, you understand how your network is functioning. You do want to apply appropriate analysis tools. Not every analytical tool is going to function the same for all different modes. So you want to apply the appropriate tools, and you also want to review and update your methodology. You want to check yourself. You don't want to get too comfortable that you know the best way to do things. I think it's very good to continue to educate yourself, continue to review, and ensure that you're up to date, basically. And also by doing that, you'll help to ensure that your network is remaining balanced, that you don't have conditions that are getting out of hand due to any number of reasons. And you can also start to see that your network is well connected, hopefully, and you can see those connections fill in over time. So that's one note about measuring and metrics, things like that. You do want to basically have this monitoring system in place, and thankfully, there is one coming online for Reston, and that data set will be updated regularly. In addition to other types of data, not just transportation, I believe there'll be land use and other things that are going to be available there. So that's pretty exciting. So this is a slide now. I think we all know the different modes, how you get around, but I guess there are some other thoughts to consider when thinking about them. Walking can certainly be more than just recreation. It can reduce your auto trips. Same with biking. It doesn't have to be just a Sunday ride. It could be a commute, or it could be for grocery shopping. It could be any number of reasons. You could replace getting in your car with one of those more active modes. If you do choose to drive, I think everybody knows the car is going to be around for a long time. We certainly want that to be an efficient and comfortable experience. For transit, it doesn't have to be, while there is a regional rail line and a major investment made to that coming through Reston, it doesn't have to be just for getting to the DC or somewhere in Maryland or another regional destination. Transit can also and should also be for local circulation. I think we've heard a lot of comments about that, north-south movements, going along Sunset Hills and Sunrise Valley Drive. There's lots of, we were just talking, or others were talking about, World Gate, and there's lots of great places to go all along the heart of Reston. And so getting that local circulator system in place and operating for everybody, I think that's really important. And then one of the things, the last one, emerging technologies, I think it came up through conversations we had about autonomous vehicles, but it could really be any number of things. It's sort of the great unknown, and I think it's important to account for that in some way and understand that there will be technologies emerging that we don't know what they are today, we don't know what they look like in the future, but at least in some form or fashion recognize that they'll likely be coming online. Excuse me. And so as we get towards conclusion of this presentation. I have a couple more slides, but this one here is really, we through our conversation, we talked about some goals that, you know, this is really more just to get the juices flowing, get you guys thinking about, guys and gals, excuse me, getting everybody thinking about you know, what kind of goals would they like to see for Reston? Obviously, equity and public health, promoting that, safe and efficient travel, doing that in a way that reduces environmental impacts, and then having not only connectivity among individual modes, you know, all your sidewalks link up and all your bike lanes connect, but having those intermodal connections so that you can walk to a transit stop, or you can drive and park by a Capital Bike Share station or somewhere else and get on a bike. Anyway, having that idea of having your different modes well connected as well, I think is pretty important. So those are just some thoughts to consider. This last one, I guess I think what we wanted to do was, this is a graphic that we pulled from the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation's multimodal system design guidelines. So the thought here was that we talk about these you know, balancing of modes and giving guidance. We were trying to do a little bit of real world application here and say, this could be any street USA. This is not necessarily Reston, but the idea here being, if we're given some guidance from the community that, you know, we want to see, say, transit and pedestrian modes prioritized on a street. Now, on this street, does not look like that's happening currently. We have about 62 feet of right of way. You've got, you know, it looks like, you know, both sides have some on-street parking, you know, no real pedestrian facilities, not a lot of amenities for pedestrians, no transit stops. Anyway, so you see the street, you have 62 feet of right of way. If we're given guidance about what the changes should be based on your, you know, the community's preferences, what could we do? This next slide sort of breaks down that same 62 feet of right of way, so you don't have to take any more land from anyone. You can work with all within the existing right of way, but you can put in different elements. Obviously, it's going to look quite different, you know, transformative essentially, but it all fits within that same space. I think that was the point of these last two graphics, was that giving guidance, some emphasis. If you say, you know, modal emphasis, we want to see more. We want to see transit and pedestrians, you know, emphasized on this corridor. What can we do? We can put in crosswalks. We can obviously, you know, put some pedestrian amenities in there, make it a nicer space to walk. Obviously, you see the bus running there now. So that the point of this is that there's a lot that can be done within some existing right of way if we're given that sort of encouragement or guidance or emphasis through the comprehensive plan. So that was the point of those last two slides, and I did not want to take very long. Again, you guys have lots of work ahead of you, but I want to thank, obviously, Scott. I hope you're feeling better, man. You know, that's no fun having some something like that. Nigel, thank you so much for your help with this, and John Mooney as well. So obviously all the folks at DOT that contributed. So that's the end of the presentation for tonight. Again, it was just a short sort of get the ball rolling type of presentation here. So happy to stick around for questions, but again, we didn't want to take up too much of your time.
John, you're muted.
I said thank you, John, for the very clear presentation. And what I'd like to do is start with Scott so the dear man can try to catch some sleep. So Scott, do you have any comments on the questions of either multimodal goals or the metrics to measure their success?
I do not. Our conversations have gone to a recognition that right now we don't have a standardized measurement for all of our modes. It's sad, but we don't. I would just like the working group and ultimately the committee to consider DOT will always publish an annual report of lane miles resurfaced or new lane miles created. So if you can think of in terms of new 10-foot multi-use path that is called for or is created, that would be the metric I would be looking for, because it just continually works towards that connectivity piece. And getting the nodes connected and interconnected is really what is going to make it a multimodal Reston work.
Okay. Thank you, Scott. And my friend, go sleep.
Aye, Captain.
Okay. Nigel, how about you? Or John King, did you want to say something?
No, I was waving to Scott. I hope he gets some rest.
Okay. Nigel?
Hi, folks. No, I mean, I don't really have anything to add. I think John encapsulated our discussion well. I'm really more interested to hear any thoughts or reactions from the folks here in the meeting, if that's the next thing you're planning to do, John.
Okay. Thank you, Nigel. And let me just cite the other major partner, and that's Mike Garcia. Mike, do you have anything to add at this point?
I do not. We just really want to hear from the working group and hear their ideas and thoughts.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Let me, if you don't mind, folks, let me kick it off. When we discussed this a week and a half ago or so, Mike and John and Scott and Nigel worked on this over the weekend, but in the longer meeting we had then, we talked about metrics aren't, you'd have to use different metrics. So for example, I want to mention this as perhaps a stimulus to the group's conversation. So what do we mean by metrics for pedestrian facilities? The things that we discussed then were develop and maintain pedestrian networks, whether trails or sidewalks, that are complete. That is, they hook up. They're right size, they're not too narrow. They're connected with retail and public service areas and with public transit lines. They're equitably distributed on all areas of Reston. They're safe, measured both in pedestrian crashes and fatalities and pedestrian injuries and assaults. And finally, and perhaps bottom line measure, they're attractive enough to encourage use, increased use. So we said we need different kinds of metrics, almost performance standards, things that they do that entice people to use that mode of transportation. So, and we talked about some other categories, other transportation modalities, and kind of talked about similar criteria, but the one we worked on most then was pedestrians. So I throw that out as an additional stimulus to conversation. How do we promote a healthy, balanced, multimodal transportation system, and what characteristics do we want to embody in those systems that would make them successful? Does that make sense?
It does, John. Mark Malcolm.
Yes, Mark.
I'd like to speak a little bit to that. Appreciate the metrics as you identified. I've been, from my particular set of training, quality metrics are always nebulous in their implementation and actual measurement. But when you walk to looking at metrics, particularly the focus, I think, has to be with intermodal connectivity. I appreciate what John King presented. He presented 6 modes of transportation, and then talked to 5 modal options, but I want to focus on one set of intermodal connectivity. It's really the big one that creates balance and gets away from the car's roads bikes discussion. So focus on pedestrians and your bus transportation. Because what you have is, I haven't really heard any discussion of what we've had with the Fairfax connector, the selection of routes. When you focus on buses being used for commuters, you do not necessarily focus on the interconnectivity within the community in full. You have to draw a balance. And what Fairfax connector has done is focused very well on the commuter aspects, and RIBS had originally existed to deal with that inner connectivity within Reston itself. The metric that you focus on in that particular case, I believe, is what is the population accessibility to various bus stops along a route. The route is planned to be executed X amount of time, but also distance of population to walk to a bus stop has a big impact on how many people will ride a particular bus. Why would I even think of that? I happened to be, when I was going to work in Crystal City, my best mode of transportation was using bus to bus to bus to get to work versus bus to metro. Well, bus to metro, and metro ride can switch to metro and yet another bus. Where does that impact? People can walk a quarter mile very easily. You extend it to a half mile, they tend to not want to ride a bus. Why do I think of that? The nearest two bus stops to me are 1/5 of a mile on one side going one direction, and make it a quarter mile crossing Sunrise Valley the other. But that one that's a quarter mile is disappearing this week. And so the nearest one will be more than 1/3 of a mile away. That's acceptable to me. But those are giving examples of quantifiable metrics that need to be looked at with intermodal connectivity. Hope I've given some thought for discussion.
Thank you, Mark. Anybody else?
Yeah, John, can I just briefly respond to that? This is Nigel. I think one of the things that we, began to talk about when we were helping John and Mike prepare the presentation, when Scott and I were helping John and Mike, was to have a discussion about metrics, the fact that metrics are typically single mode based, and wouldn't it be nice to come up with some metrics that measured interconnectivity, whether it was intermodal or intramodal. And we didn't really have the chance to say much about that. I think it's still something that's emerging in the industry, but I would love to see us move in that direction.
Thanks, Nigel.
Hey, John.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to, sorry, this is Mike Garcia real quick. I just want to point out that I know Nigel just talked about the interconnectivity and the connectedness of the pedestrian and the trail and the other kind of transit systems. That's also why we kind of had you all look at the trails and bike network as well, so that you all can help out with identifying if there's any gaps in the actual network. So we're hoping that here you have any comments on that tonight or very soon.
Mike, I will just tell you real quick that we have posted on the Reston, I believe we have. For sure, we've tasked the MTAC committee as a whole to look into this, and we're trying to find ways to use our communications department in RA to get people to look at those two maps. So we
Okay.
hope to be able to give you feedback, and we're looking for other ways to get feedback.
Great. Thank you very much. Sorry, Bill. Didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, this is a difficult topic because usually when people talk about metrics, they're talking about math. And math, as I think Nigel just pointed out, tends to be single mode at a time. And it's hard to do it, particularly with modes that are going to be increasingly used for which we don't have as much history. But I guess in broad terms, the metrics I think are, what are people using? Just a factual matter. What are people using? To what extent can we maximize or get more people to be using the things that have the least environmental impact, i.e. walking, biking, transit? How pleasant is the method of transportation, and how safe for the users and for bystanders? Do the modes of transport support the people who are living in Reston and will be living in Reston and the businesses? Does it perform the local community functions? And does it mitigate environmental impacts of transportation, which have historically been one of our largest sources of environmental impacts, both air pollution, runoff issues off of roads and the like, often with chemicals associated, and just the destruction of landscapes to accommodate more and more roads. So are there ways we're mitigating impacts? In terms of quantitative, I guess, to what extent are we getting the most out of the investments in transit, walking and biking? Those are the new modes. And to what extent are we maximizing those and getting the best bang for our buck and doing the least to disadvantage, as it would be seen by people who traditionally lived here and have traditionally used cars, because our houses are spread all over the place. And that's where the balance comes in. But those would be my broad views, not very mathematical.
Thanks, Bill.
This is Burton. I'm sorry to be joining you late. I got the timing of this meeting mixed up with the late start that we have on an upcoming regular task force meeting. And I'm sorry if I missed out on some of the discussion, obviously, but I just had a couple ideas while I was hearing some of the speakers in the last 10 minutes. I thought that there have been over the last 10 years or so, occasionally some comparisons publicized on how long it takes for a biker to get to, from point A to point B versus car versus metro or bus. And I think that sort of comparison can be inspiring and thought-provoking. And if you combine that with, add to that, a comparison different times of day, that can also be really thought-provoking. For example, going from Reston to Tyson's Corner in rush hour versus midday by car, bike, and rail or bus. And then if there was also a comparison of the annual cost of operating X car versus a bike versus taking transit, then, I mean, it's a little bit challenging to put that together because people have different makes and models of car and makes and models of bikes. But, you know, to compare those figures would give people something to think about when they're making transportation choices. Another metric that I think is a great one is that 100% of connector buses have bike racks on them. For years, I was using those connector buses to commute to work until the connector buses were, the route that I was using was eliminated because the metro was introduced. And whereas during rush hour, I could take a bike on the connector bus, I could not take it on metro at the time. So I stopped taking public transportation.
Thank you, Burton.
John, this is Mark. I guess following on what Bill was asking and maybe some of what Burton was getting at, and I'm sorry if I missed this in the earlier explanation, but what is it that you and staff and the MTAC group anticipate doing with this information relative to the plan? Obviously, you know, none of us are really a fan of the levels of service concept as sort of the end all be all of how you evaluate these things. But what is it that we anticipate using this information to accomplish in the context of the month or so that we've got left on what we're working on to try to inform our final product?
Yeah,
Let me
I think I have the same question. I'm not really sure how this relates to what we're doing on the comp plan. I think I'm just really confused. Are we trying to create a new method of calculating things? I'm not sure how this connects to the comp plan.
And John, I'll just have to add to Mark and Jennifer, I would say the same thing. That I think we were trying to get, you know, we've already done the draft and so forth, we were trying to get some of the measurement here, and I think the staff was looking into that, but what I'm hearing from them is there aren't any comprehensive metrics, and the specific ones we have, like level of service, aren't very desirable. So I guess what I'm kind of hearing is that unless we come up with something here, we just kind of have to work through the plan with words in a way that communicates what we're trying to communicate to the readers, whoever those are, whether they're citizens or whether they're, you know, the planning groups in the county and for the developers.
And I guess to build onto Gary's point, I mean, at some level, there's kind of two different questions that go into this, right? One is what facilities are needed, meaning both capacity in terms of, is it 2 lanes, is it 4 lanes, is it at grade, is it grade separated in terms of roadway networks. But then there's and that calculation is driven in part by sort of what you're willing to tolerate along different road networks, both from a metric standpoint, meaning, you know, however you calculate the functionality of the road network, but also I'll call it anecdotally what you're willing to sit through, right? I mean, one of the things that some other jurisdictions have focused on is sort of time of travel as opposed to functionality at a particular intersection. If there are 7 intersections between point A and point B and 6 of them function fine and the 7th one functions horribly, the time of travel is affected, but you don't make improvements along the entire length of the corridor to solve for one intersection. And you know, that's sort of one metric that goes into it. The other is sort of the anecdotal, how long are you willing to sit at that one bottleneck intersection, independent of the metric you choose to evaluate it, because it's a it's a source of conflict and a source of angst amongst the community. And then, once you've sort of decided that, then there's the prioritization question of where are you spending your money and how many years are you going to let it go by before you fix a particular issue or a problem, right? And a lot of what's baked into the current plan, and I'll get off my soapbox here in a second, but a lot of what's baked into the comp plan is not necessarily widening existing facilities. It's creating alternatives that get people off of those existing facilities, whether it's bridge crossings, grid street networks. It's not really focused on expanding the existing rights of ways and other things. It's about building alternatives so that in the cumulative, you're shifting 20, 30, 40% of your traffic off of Reston Parkway or off of Wheelie Avenue or off of Sunrise or Sunset in order to reduce the congestion in those corridors. And so if what we're talking about is using some sort of modified metric to say, is it really worth building a parallel road to Sunset Hills Road, then, coming up with what your inputs into the metric analysis, is an important calculation. But if we're not going to be making those types of, significant adjustments, which I'm not certain that we need to do, then, the question then becomes, well, how does that inform what we're presenting to the full task force?
Thank you, Mark, and Jennifer and Gary. And I too believe at this point we should move to the next item. Our discussion tonight has been very general. I thought we might get into more specific, call them metrics, call them tactics, to make alternative modes of transportation more possible and attractive, but we're remaining at a rather general level, and unless people strenuously disagree, I would say let's call this a wrap at this point. And
one comment I'd like to make, and that is that when we started out with the presentation, he mentioned all sorts of possibilities of transportation, walking, hiking, driving in a safe manner, transit. I think that for a balance, as he was discussing, we need all of these. And
right.
We need them in a balanced way. And I think we should keep that thought forward as we go on, not to overstimulate one or the other, but to have all of them interconnected. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Does anybody, I don't think it's useful to stay at the broad level and general level that we've been doing so far. It kind of gives us, once again, articulates the broad framework. But so I would say, I would propose, unless anyone strenuously disagrees, that we move to the item number 5. And what we really want to do is spend most of our time on item number 6. Does anyone disagree with moving on? Okay, thank you. The question is whether or not anybody has, I've handed out 2 things, a summary of the transportation section figures that are in the current plan. And then John and Mike gave a presentation on the pedestrian and bike maps, both current and proposed. Does anybody, does anybody want to say anything about under 5A, the current figures in the 2013-14 plan? Does anybody have any strong feelings about what should be included or excluded or changed?
Well, I just have a question. What document are you referring to? There's so many. I confess I'm
Okay.
sometimes
Okay,
lost.
sorry. Yeah, I did not reattach it. It was handed out prior to the last meeting, and it had the various, let's do this. Let us not discuss this. If Bill Penniman is not prepared, um, who else might be prepared to discuss that? Why don't you email the whole working group? Anything you have to say about which figure should be included, changed, substituted for, or whatever, let me know. And let me know about 5B, whether you have any comments about the Fairfax County heads and bikes maps, okay? Let us not spend any further time on it.
Hey, John, sorry, it's Lynn. Could you just let me know what the file name of the document that you're referring to is so I can go to the correct one?
I will resend it to everybody after the meeting.
Perfect. Thank you.
And I apologize. I thought I had attached it to tonight's agenda, and I did not. So my bad. Okay. The main act.
Don't worry, we won't beat you up, John.
Okay. The next item is number 6, the continued markup of the March draft of the transportation connectivity chapter. So what we want to spend most of the time on is the current version, which now Jennifer has put on the screen. I also sent you all a table of key changes among the 3 versions we have seen. One is the original comprehensive plan version of 2013-14. The other is Jennifer and John's restructured version of the same. No changes in the text, just stitched together as a whole rather than in different places. And then finally, what I'm now referring to as the March edition, or what I call it, anyway, March draft, which is what we've been working on. Let's focus on this. I would ask you to look at the name of what I sent you is, it's a table of comparison between those 3. I think you all know what I'm talking about. And we need to look at that. I've tried, let me give the history of it again. Walter indicated that he would like to have a red line version. However, the way we went about this is we did the new version from scratch, so there's nothing to redline. So Jennifer has marked it marked the March draft with comments about what has changed. What I did was using the reconstructed.
You're on mute, John.
You're muted.
John,
Okay, thank you. So,
I don't think we heard you for a while, John.
well, you're in a blessed state then. Let us focus on Jennifer's thing, okay? Jennifer's, what she has on the screen. What I did in response to Walter's desire to see a red line version, which we cannot have because when we did the March draft, we started from scratch, so there was nothing to redline. So what I did in response to Walter's desire is do a comparison of the original comprehensive plan transportation sections. Secondly, the stitching together of those various sections into one continuous document, which John and Jennifer did about January. And thirdly, this March draft, which we have in front of us, which was done from scratch. And what I tried to do to give the benefits of something like a red line version is show where parts of the original comprehensive plan are not included in the March version. And I would ask you in preparation for the next meeting to see if there's anything in that little study I did that you don't feel good about having been excluded, that we somehow should work to restore. Does that make sense? Or is that so complicated it just...
John, Mark, Malcolm, relative to the column that deals with the March draft, there are some things that are parentheses looking at omissions, and there are others that are not with parentheses of a number and needing to be clear. Were those also omissions or additions, or what does that represent?
So I tried to write a clear legend at the top, how to read this. So if you have a number in parentheses, it says, this is where I guess it would go if it were there, but it isn't there. So the parenthesis means it is not there. But what I'm saying is page 1 or 2 or 3 in parentheses is where it likely would be if it were in the March draft. Does that make sense, Mark?
To me, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
It's the ones that aren't in parentheses, not clear because it's not defined in the table.
So the ones that are not in parentheses really have a location in that particular draft, okay? So they have a real location. So it, go ahead.
I just have a suggestion as we go through what Jennifer's got up there. I would suggest that John Carter and her kind of go through this with the comments, because they, took this from scratch. They did a fabulous job that everybody complimented them on last time. And maybe we can go through this with people's comments and, John and Jennifer know the two items, the last comprehensive plan and this one, and maybe they could make comments as we go through it.
Okay. Let us therefore, I hear no desire to discuss the document I drew up. John and Jennifer, I trust you know what I'm getting at. If anyone else understands what I was trying to do, please say whether there's anything not in the March draft that you would want restored.
And I was just commenting, I think John Carter knows those differences. I'm putting him on the spot here, but he may be able to comment as we go through. It's my thought.
Okay. Okay, let us.
John Mooney.
Yes, sir.
While you were doing this comparative analysis, were there any changes that seemed potentially problematic to you?
A few, but let's not dwell on that. Let us. So the file is called Comparison of Transportation Text in the Comp Plan, Restructured Draft, and March Draft. So it was attached to the. Agenda for today, but let us not go into it. No one had. Let us not dwell on it. John and
I would like to say that the first paragraph, the transportation community-wide recommendations, I like that.
I'm sorry.
What is that not in the comprehensive plan on the legend on page 1 of the March draft, the key language of RDCP, either omitted or relocated in the MD. I think all of the things listed there are important.
So are you talking about index number 1?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think so too, because as it stands, it is all, it only regards the Reston community itself and doesn't talk about connections with the surrounding area, for example. So anyway, and it explicitly talks about not just current community, but future community members. So, but let me work with John and Jennifer on that. I don't think it would be helpful to dwell on it tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay.
John Money, it's Walter. Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
I think it is important. You mentioned a little while ago that there were some important differences, maybe. Maybe some things that were left out or maybe overlooked. You didn't use those words, but
no, and I think it's a masterful job what John and Jennifer have done. It is not a critique, but either because of the incredible speed at which they worked on this, or editorial decisions they made. I'm not saying those are wrong decisions. I'm just saying they are decisions. There are things that were left out, and is everybody comfortable with them being left out?
Well, I think it would be helpful for this group if perhaps you could spend a couple of minutes just flagging those items that are substantially different, or at least stuck out to you as maybe not included in the new draft, or maybe some new ideas that were included. I think that would be really helpful.
So,
John, this is David Bunnell. Let me kick that off. Your work, it strikes me that index number 4 and index number 5, both of which have to do with pedestrian mobility and bicycle facilities, or whatever new name we come across. Both of those things are hugely important for the interconnectivity of the various parts of Reston. And it strikes me that they should be reinserted. The comments that you've highlighted especially should be reinserted.
And I think that we saw some of these reinserted from the people who sent edits. Like, for instance, I believe, Burton, it was you added it, or I don't know, maybe it was Penniman, I can't remember, as I was editing. There's a whole section at the very end here now called connectivity. Here it is. Penniman. Oh, no, yours is on climate and transportation planning. But there, I swear that it was added somewhere by somebody when I was going through the edits. So I'm happy to kind of go through and use John Mooney's list to see where we might be able to incorporate some of that language, and I can point it out in the next version of this draft so that you guys see where I put them in, and you can decide while it's on the screen. Maybe it would be easier to decide, yes, we leave it in, or no, we take it out.
Yeah.
Would that be helpful?
Yeah, I think that I get the sense, and I delivered this late because it was so hard to do, and I apologize for that. So I think we would be wasting the task force time to try to do it because people haven't had a chance. Most people haven't had a chance to read it, and I think perhaps the most economical way would be for me to go through this with John and Jennifer, and either put text in there, and see whether people really want to put things like, so on number 15, we've referred to, instead of giving all the very specific guidelines in the latest draft on you know, what the placemaking features should be. We referred to the guidelines for development. Unfortunately, those deal only with the TSA area, and that does that leave Reston, the rest of Reston, without guidelines for the above mentioned roadways, so that we have no armor if someone developing outside the TSAs would do something that offends the guidelines, and the person could say, well, you don't have specific guidelines in the comp plan. That's what I'm worried about. So that's the kind of thing I'm worried about. Anyway,
well, John, it's Walter again. I thank you for worrying about that. I would also suggest, and maybe it's fine for you to sit down with John Carter and with Jennifer and work through that, but I might also suggest that there may be some language not currently included in the March draft that is usable by staff in ways that perhaps, you know, none of the rest of us are aware of, that might also be useful. So at some point, I'm not sure tonight makes sense, but I would really also encourage both FCDOT and DOT staff to weigh in. I mean, obviously, we're working towards having an updated document in terms of an updated comprehensive plan in the transportation section that is complete as much as possible. So anyway, just 2 cents there. And John, I thank you very much for going through this process.
Okay. And again, it's not in no way a critique of John and Jennifer. It's just, I just noted what was left out, and it's up to ultimately the task force and the supervisor to say, yeah, maybe we should put something like that back in. So these are not my decisions that everything I've noted be put back in. It's something that is a key idea which I couldn't find in there anymore. Okay. Jennifer and John, lead us through the March draft. Where are we, Jennifer? Why don't you lead us through this?
So I took the new draft of the text, and then people sent to the task force email address some of their changes or suggestions, and I combined all of those changes and suggestions into one document. Burton, you sent a second email. I got your document and I was able to incorporate that, but you sent a second email and I wasn't sure, like, I thought those were included in the draft, the full draft that you sent. So I didn't make a special effort to add that second set of comments in here. So if you think that we're missing something like that, let me know. But I think I've incorporated everybody who sent in changes.
So this is Burton. When I was editing the Word document, I was pretty careful not to actually make any changes. I made a lot of comments, but I didn't make any changes other than adding some commas and fixing a few spelling issues. But I don't think that the comments that I sent separately were probably are really integrated into the draft as it is right now. And I wasn't sure that I should just go ahead and, you know, make changes to the document without, you know, trying to make sure that my ideas were something that people supported. So that's why I just sent them in a separate email.
Okay, so we can go through that. I copy and paste into a Word document, so I would have it tonight in case we need to go through it separately since I didn't incorporate it into this main one. But I do have them, so we can go through them. So I don't know if you guys want to, you know, John Mooney, tell me, do you want to go through these one by one and pick up everybody's comments and start working our way down the document? Is that the plan for this evening?
So we've not been through the whole document yet.
Correct.
what I would like to make sure is that tonight we at least get through the whole document. And then if we've done that, we can then go back to the beginning and see about the things that the way you've incorporated people's comments. Does that make sense? I want to make sure that we've gone through the whole document. So can you take us, Jennifer, up to where we left off?
In this document, we haven't done anything. Remember, I can show you the old document and where we left off.
Okay.
But remember, this is the new document. So John gave the presentation last time.
Okay. All right.
And that we kind of ended there. We didn't start editing the document. And since then, these are the changes that people have sent.
Okay. Well, why don't you take us through and talk about, I hope everyone has had a chance to read this. Do you want to talk about the changes you made, Jennifer?
The changes that I made are just the ones that people have sent.
I'm sorry, the ones that people have suggested or that you made. Either of those.
Okay. So John, you're first. Your comments have my name at the top, but I put, when they were yours, I put your name here because you sent general comments about
Right.
the sections versus specific comments. So I don't know if you want to go through your first one.
Yeah. So the version you now have on the screen, does it have any figures in it?
It does not. It has placeholders for figures, but it does not have any figures yet.
Okay, so folks, that goes back to agenda item 5. We need to know what figures we want in there, whether we want them changed, whether we want them eliminated, whether we want new ones. So
John, didn't John Carter go through those as we went through this last time? Maybe John Carter can speak to that. Some of what he went through last time were anticipated to be in here.
I don't think Carter is on. I keep looking for him, but I don't think he's on the meeting tonight. No, I don't see him.
Okay.
I think.
But yes, that PowerPoint had a lot of examples of the types of graphics that we've been talking about adding to the document.
And as he talked through that, he went where they would go and so forth.
Right.
So I guess we are missing John significantly here. But we had a bunch of the graphics, just not all of them. They need to be worked on with the county staff and so forth.
Yeah, and if you guys were fine with those graphics in the presentation from last time, I can start inserting them into this document and you can really kind of see how they flow and whether they make sense for those specific areas.
Jennifer, you also go through what you crossed off? I mean, I see cross-offs here.
Yeah, so this is
the document. Could you say that the thing and say this was crossed off or something?
Yeah, so the very first comment we had was Mooney, and his was, that it's less, it's a third shorter, that we need to add figures, that he thinks we should use this draft versus the last one we were working on. And then we need to use our focus areas list, which we had originally come up with. And we can recirculate that and make sure that all of those are incorporated in this list. So I didn't see any problems with that. These are just kind of reminders to us to make sure we incorporate these things in the document. And I didn't think anyone would object to those.
Okay, I'm told now that John Carter is on. Hello, John.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you.
I've been here the whole time. You just can't hear me for some reason. I don't know what's going on. You know, the figures, I think we should wait because we did do a PowerPoint that went through this with all the figures that I would recommend and then some extra ones. But the use of the word figures, since this is a sort of the middle of the whole comp plan, if you start numbering figures, you're going to renumber them about 100 times, and that's going to waste a lot of time. So, you know, the proof might be in the doing. Why don't we just put the figures in, and then you can see whether you like them or not, rather than trying to do it so-called virtually. Would that make sense?
John?
Yes.
Could you if you've sent it, could you resend your list of the actual figures?
I can.
Not incorporated into the text.
Yeah.
So that we can look at them.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I would caution you about the figures that are in the comp plan today. An awful lot of those have been superseded and they don't really say anything. And there are repetitions in the comp plan today, like the bikeways map. The same map is in there twice. So.
Right. Okay. Sounds like a good solution. So we'll get a separate bundle of figures that John has proposed.
The other thing I'd like to talk about would be the method of recording. The changes, of course, are up to the task force, but I would ask you to keep track of them in a color or something, because this document, we don't want to have to retype the document. And you can't use track changes when we go to the publishing software that we're probably going to be used. So it has to be a document without track changes, with very little formatting to bring it into the InDesign publishing software that we'll need to incorporate properly the graphics. So I'm not questioning the changes you want to make. I just want to make sure we record them. I don't really care much who made them, as long as the group likes them. I'm not worried about who makes them. Just record them in colors, and those will have to be retyped into the original.
Let me just comment on that. It is nothing to read carefully these 15 pages. Yeah. And I hear you saying that you would prefer to avoid the track changes feature.
It's okay to use the track changes. Make sure they're in a color, because what we will do is retype them into the original. Okay. The track changes is fine. Yeah. Just make sure we record them in a color that's obvious.
Okay, thank you. Because it would be too arduous for us all if we had to read carefully the whole thing.
No, I'm not suggesting that.
Yeah.
No.
So knowing what the changes are facilitates our continuing review. Okay.
Yes. Then they can be retyped into the original if we know what the changes are. Maybe a couple things I would say. That placemaking chapter, I pretty much deleted, and let's not blame Jennifer on this, that whole chapter, because there are inconsistencies in that chapter between the comp plan and the design guidelines. And the design guidelines were produced later with probably better informed, perhaps I'll say, in a tactful way. So that's why that's probably the most significant change. Also, John, the thing that you brought up is that the original document, the placemaking aspect, really only applied to the TS area. And what we wanted to do is apply to, in at least the comp plan, to the whole of Reston. So I think that's a good point.
Other changes understood and applauded.
Yeah, the other change, which I didn't make, but we should make, is in the topic that we talked about at first, is this way of assessing whether we're using level of service or some other method. I just put that whole thing in the way it was. And what it says is we will use level of service E in the TSA areas and something else outside with no definition of what that should be. So we should probably look at that. Do you want to keep the LOS method? Do you want to have something different in the neighborhoods versus the TSA? I think that chapter, in terms of recommendations, probably needs some more thoughtful additions to it. So with that, I'm ready to go through the whole thing one by one.
Thank you, John.
John, this is Bill Penniman, or John, the two Johns.
Yes, three.
On the placemaking issue, placemaking is the most important thing in the comp plan, as far as I'm concerned. Well, all right, that's an exaggeration, but it's a really important feature, because if you don't have placemaking guidelines that are clear, then there's a danger that developers will come in and do something that'll mess up and create inconsistencies between blocks and inconsistencies. So having some place in the comp plan that spells that out seems to me important. As to the areas, and obviously I am in that statement focusing on the newly developed areas in the TSAs. I'm certainly happy to see something regarding the rest of Reston, but I think it would probably be a general statement like preserving, the general atmosphere or something of the areas, because there's not going to be a lot of development, and we're not trying to set new guidelines for the design review board, which I guess doesn't do roads, so maybe that's not relevant. In any event, it's less important, though I'm happy to see language that somebody drafts for the rest of us.
I think we do tend to leave off the rest of Reston, and I tried not to do that in this document, because I think there are some things, and these are things that others brought to my attention. I know Michelle Kimmel is big on this one issue about sidewalks and the location of sidewalks. We don't have sidewalks in Reston to speak of. And the ones that we do have are in the wrong location. This is what Michelle brings up all the time, is the sidewalks that we have are too close to the curb, and it's not safe, particularly for kids. Another thing we don't have in Reston are trees. We have no trees in the right-of-way. No trees in the medians, almost exclusively. No trees in the right-of-way. Almost nowhere in Reston are there trees in the right-of-way. And so I think some of those things should be in this. And I agree with you, Bill, that placemaking is very important. And of course, that's my focus on the commission. So I appreciate your comments about that. But let's not leave out the neighborhoods. There are things, if we think about that and listen to what other people have said about that, we ought to try to do a little bit better.
I agree with you, John Carter. And a further reason to deal with the rest of Reston in terms of placemaking is while a lot of fresh from the ground development is not going to happen, there will be redevelopment. And we need to have guidelines for the redevelopment.
Yes. I mean, we always talk the village centers, we talk about the Home Depot area, we talk about Bowman Green, we talk about some of the redevelopment of the residential areas and small redevelopments, not a major redevelopment, but and so
affordable housing.
Affordable housing, yes. And we also talk about the bus system for the rest of Reston, and not so much for the TSAs, but more for the rest of Reston. And maybe there's some trail issues, and there certainly are the sidewalks and the tree issue. So anyway, I don't mean to prolong all of that.
Okay. Jennifer, lead us on, please.
Okay, so next is Gary's comment. He just said he liked the document and appreciates it. So I think we're good there.
I wonder if there's someone who could do this faster. This is going to be a little painful going through paragraph by paragraph or page by page. Of the comments we received, I mean, maybe other people have comments, but I didn't have really objections to what people were putting in. I don't know. Is there some faster way we could do this?
I mean, the only way I can say is I can send it out.
Okay.
I was going to add that while John was trying to get back into the meeting, I think it was it Burton that was saying that he had sent in comments, but he didn't want to change the text in the body, but his comments were things that he wanted to put before the group to get their take. Is that correct?
I think
that's right, Lynn. Yeah, so I hesitated to make any changes that were significant, and instead I put a lot of comments, but then I sent some more comments, which were more general comments in an email. So that was not included in the Word document that we're looking at.
Well,
I can bring Burton's up if you want to go through.
I mean, we've all gotten to know Burton pretty well. I'm not sure I would be debating what Burton wants to put in there. I don't know. We can if you want, but.
Well,
John, this is David Vanel. Can I make a suggestion?
Yes.
In order to make this run more smoothly, why don't we have Jennifer shut down the track changes screen, the track changes item, so all we will see is the modified text. The colors will remain, the crossouts will remain or should remain, and if at the appropriate point someone who has made a comment on that paragraph or that bullet item can do it verbally. And that way I think we would move through this document a lot faster.
Sounds good.
I'm going to express a contrary view, which perhaps the chair shouldn't do, but I think the marked up copy allows us to see what have been, relatively speaking, the non-controversial pieces of the draft, which we can go through more quickly, whereas the markup shows where there have been either positive comments or concerns. So
I second that. I'm looking at this on page 2, and the comment is Town Center Parkway with its extension is not mentioned below, and it will become a major street, especially with RTC West nearing completion. And that's something that if we take those comments out, we won't know what that comment was, or that we need to consider it.
So
yeah, I guess it's a difficult choice, John and David, because there are comments like mine that she's mentioning and Burton's that we won't know what this. I guess we just should bring them up as we go down. That's what you're saying, David.
That's exactly right. I think I mean
and I would just bring it up at that point, and I guess also the same would be true of Burton and the.
But I'm only offering that as a suggestion. I you know, if the majority of the people don't want to do that, then we can go comment by comment.
No, that's fine with me. I was trying to get my head around it. Sorry, David. Let's go to John.
So, do people prefer going through the unannotated text or the annotated text? You've heard arguments for each. How many do we have a way of voting, Lisa?
Not that I am trained to do.
Okay.
I think Jose can do that, but I don't have that skill.
Very
Why
fine.
don't you just pick one, John, the one that's in favor, and we'll just go with it.
Yeah, if I may, as chair, say, hearing carefully what David says, let us not dwell on every comment, but let us use the comments, the annotated version with the comments, so we know where we have to pause. Otherwise, I would say let's accept the text as it is if it is unannotated with comments. Does that make sense? That assumes that everybody has carefully read the text.
Yeah, well said.
I
Is
think
that
we need to see the comments.
Okay, so Jennifer, would you please go through the annotated version then, and when you hit the person's name, so you're next, for example, if you want to comment, Jennifer, on what your comment was, then do so. Otherwise, say no comments and just keep going. Make sense? So Gary, do you have
So
any?
I'm on Gary's. This one is just saying that it seems to be the document seems to be leaning towards bicycles and walking over autos, and that we should be careful throughout.
Okay.
That we have a balance.
Okay.
Sorry, I was muted. Sorry, I was muted. It was just a general comment that you read this. It's very heavily focused on, bicycles and walking, and very little on automobiles, which are, to me, a reality, and also not a lot on buses. And it's just a general comment. That's all it is.
Thank you.
Okay, Mooney, yours is next.
So basically, I addressed a few points. A big point was made earlier that we don't want to just talk about transportation. We also want to talk about connectivity, and so our little group is called the Transportation Connectivity Working Group. But we've not talked a whole lot about connectivity. Do we want to do it? It's a question. Or do we want to use the term transportation, mobility, connectivity, or in what combination? And then also in the introduction and in the text, we do not, there are no geographical subheadings. I'm not saying this is wrong. We talked earlier whether we were going to have geographical subheadings under the topic headings. We've not done that. And all I'm saying is, because Mark Looney was concerned about this as making it more difficult for certain users to read, are we comfortable not having geographical subheadings?
For transportation, I'm comfortable not having geographic subheadings, and the placemaking piece may, with the figures, as you get down in this document, they're charts, and I think that the charts make it very readable. But for geographical subheadings, I think that it is absolutely imperative in the land use, but not necessarily in the transportation section, because transportation is separated by basically road type or, bike pedestrian paths.
Okay.
That's just me.
Anybody agree or disagree with that?
So this is Mark. The only comment I'll make is that historically, and I heard the conversations earlier about sidewalk locations and other sorts of things. Historically, I'll call it the streetscape elements outside of the transit station areas have not included streetscape elements that you would see inside the transit station areas, which is why you have sidewalks without street trees. It's why you don't have street lights in Reston. It's why you have a whole bunch of other conditions that exist because of 50 plus years worth of decision making that said that those things were not what the community wanted to see. If the objective is to try to bring some of those elements from the TSA areas into the rest of Reston and make it uniform throughout the community, I think I'm fine with no geographic decisions unless this thing turns out to be 60 pages, in which case, if it's 60 pages, then I might ask that it be broken up again. But if we can keep it to a manageable number, I think that's doable. But I think there's a policy question of whether the historic pedestrian connections that have existed in Reston with trails as opposed to sidewalks, without street lights, without street trees, if that's where the community wants to continue to go, then that's a different animal altogether than stuff that's inside the TSA areas, which have a completely different feel and intent.
Thank you, Mark.
And I guess I would agree with both Jennifer and Mark on that. If it gets to be too long, it would need to be cut back, but leaving it as is, except for the major policy issue that Mark just mentioned, which is a big thing. If we were to change that, that we would have to discuss somewhere along the line here.
Why
John?
don't we wait till we get to that placemaking section? And I think Mark has a good point there. Although we might want to change the policy, I doubt that we want to make it exactly like the TSA's area. So maybe when we get to placemaking, we could think about separating that. It probably isn't much effort to make that separation. Mike, you've heard me say this before. I like it together primarily because bikeways and streets, you can't, it's hard to isolate those to TSA versus non-TSA.
So I think on this one, we can leave it as unresolved and say we're going to have to come back to it later.
Yeah, I think the placemaking that Mark is bringing up may be a good one that we ought to have separate paragraphs or separate sections, whatever. Okay, let's just start from the top and move through.
Hey, Burton. This is your first one.
Yeah, I think ensuring is a better word choice here is all. And then my second comment there is oh, I forget. So anyway, yes, that one. That is one of the main or one of the general comments that I had, which is in a lot of the text, there's the word vehicles used when what is meant is automobiles. So I would just say basically replace all the vehicles with automobiles and replace vehicular with automobile.
I wouldn't change it to automobiles because we have many types of vehicles. We have moving vehicles, we had cars, we have trucks, we have a lot of different ones. So if it makes a difference, then we should say it. But vehicles is a larger item.
My point is vehicles include bikes. So
in your comments, Bert,
if there's a better word than if there's a better word than automobile, I'm not sure what it is. I can think of a phrase, and the phrase is a vehicle that is the weight of the vehicle is greater than the weight of the people that are in the vehicle. So that to me is the key thing that distinguishes a bike from the other vehicles, or or a scooter from other vehicles.
We could perhaps in the document have a definition of what we mean by the word vehicles or automobiles, and then we wouldn't have to repeat it.
I think the context is going to depend on how the word is being used, because sometimes Burton might want it to include bicycles and sometimes not.
Yeah.
But in any event, in this particular spot, the suggestion is to take the sentence out so we can at least defer the debate to another time.
Well, there you go.
Well, Burton, let me suggest a solution that you yourself suggested in your comments on bicycles, and that is calling them motorized vehicles.
Yeah, that would work pretty well. I also pointed out that an e-bike is a motorized vehicle, but I think that calling what we're referring now to as vehicles usually means cars, trucks, buses, and I think it would be an improvement at least to call it motorized vehicles versus just vehicles. Okay. Vehicles, the word itself, I'd like to reserve for instances where we actually mean to talk about bikes and cars at the same time.
Okay.
And
we'll figure it out. We got your point.
Yep. And Bill, I think that you were the one that said, let's just take this whole sentence out.
Yes.
Anyone object to that?
Well, I don't object. I mean,
Okay, go once, going twice. Okay, sentence is gone. It's now gonna have to be gone twice, or maybe 3 times.
but let me just make a procedural point. I think we would be wasting precious time if we tried to actually edit it. I would rather focus on the comments, get the gist of it, and then let our editorial committee come back with the words. Is there any sympathy for my position?
Well, can Jennifer do that? I mean, it's Jennifer and John. Can Jennifer keep up with it to do what you're suggesting, John? If so, that sounds good.
Let's try it and see.
It's a good suggestion, John. We can move quickly.
So Gary, you're next.
To me, this is a lot of words to just say the word fundamental change. I don't know, in reading the last comprehensive plan, that what we're doing here really is a fundamental change. That's my only point. It's an editorial point.
Agreed.
Okay.
So you're saying just get rid of this word, right?
I think Bill just agreed with that. So I guess if Mr. Mooney, is there anybody that disagrees with that?
Okay, then fundamental goes away. Okay, Burton, you're next.
This is another general point that I wanted to make, is that throughout here, there's some places where whenever bikes and pedestrians are discussed, or bicyclists and pedestrians are discussed, there's a talk about safety. But I think that we should recognize when we're talking about transportation that people care, regardless of the mode they choose, they care about getting there fast and safely and comfortably. So I don't know that I need to have any change to this particular sentence, but there's other spots in the text where I'd want to get that idea expressed.
I agree.
Any objections?
None.
I think that's a substantive issue, but the idea of fast is fast compared to what? A superhighway? I think speed is something we want people to be able to move at a reasonable rate under the circumstances, but let's not overdo it. People who walk at whatever pace they want. People who drive too fast most of the time relative to the posted speed limit. So let's stay away from that one if we can.
And Bill, I'm approaching this, like I was looking at mostly the bicycle and pedestrian sections of this. So, in the case of pedestrians, talking about speed, when you know that pedestrians care about speed too, that means you consider some designs that account for that, like with an overpass or underpass, or limiting the wait time. And when you're talking about considering speed for bikes as well, that means you consider designs that allow for bikes to travel quickly. So you have grading of bikeways, bike paths, shared use paths, whatever you might want to call them, that are graded for speed, like roads are graded for speed. So there's not a lot of up and downs. There's not a lot of sharp turns where you have to decelerate and then accelerate again. So that's what I'm getting
So
at.
Burton, do you want to try adding some of the language changes that you you would see us making?
Yeah, like all of the general changes that or general comments that I emailed, I think I could take a stab at making edits to the text myself. I just didn't want to jump in and do that without checking with the group on whether that whether the general ideas were supported.
Just a comment on it as a sometimes pedestrian, sometimes bicyclist. There are bicyclists who go so fast they scare the bejesus out of both fellow bicyclists and pedestrians. So unless you want to also get into speed limits, maybe we should just talk about convenience and leave speed not a topic for the comp plan.
Yeah, I would support avoidance of the word speed. As it stands, it is potentially too scary for the reasons Bill mentioned. I think some other way of putting it, and I would say, Burton, you're good at this. You're good at words. Think of a different way of putting it. But to have speed unqualified as a characteristic that we want, I think is too frightening.
But he's emphasizing
Okay,
safe.
yeah,
too,
convenience pretty much is equivalent, so that's fine.
Oops. Gary, I think you're next. Are these the principles we agreed to?
I assume those are our basic principles. I was just asking the question.
I think they are. They were meant to be. Maybe somebody
yes.
should check that.
Because I see people are editing them again.
Well, those were the ones we agreed to. I don't know if we should go back over that because we spent a lot of time coming to an agreement.
Well,
so if they were
okay. This is Bill, since I was one who made some suggestions for edits. One suggestion is that instead of saying connection between modes of travel are convenient, safe, and efficient, well, they aren't. So we shouldn't say are, we say they should be, or they are to be. That if they already are, then there's no reason for the comp plan to talk about them. And then the last one was an addition, which I think makes sense.
And they'll add it to the end of this document, a whole section on this last bullet.
Correct.
The only objection I have is we spent so much time doing that and getting agreement for the entire task force that we're going back to the principles that were agreed to by the whole task force. So as a procedural matter, I guess Bill's edits look, pretty reasonable. We'd all have to talk about the last one, I guess. But what do we do about this?
Ask the task force. If they don't agree to it, that's fine.
I also would say that the equity group is going to be working. We've asked them to provide us, something for the transportation section that would include equity. And I would imagine that it would be added to this bulleted point list as well.
Good. I don't agree with
John, this is Nigel. Can I just make a comment? As one of the people that originally worked on these, the comment that was made about the edits to add to be rather than just are principles. They aren't a statement of what is here now. The principles are our aspirations for how we want Reston to I mean, I guess they still mean the same thing if you add to be. We were just trying to make it sound more aspirational rather than just kind of, I feel like it sort of takes something away by adding the to be's. It's not a big deal though.
Well, I think your point is fine, but then it needs a different introduction. That this is the way it should wind up, or something. I'm not going to be, but it needs a different introductory statement. That's all. I'm not going to fall on the sword.
For what it's worth, I would go with Nigel's aspirational approach to the verbiage here.
As long as you can indicate that it is aspirational.
In the original document that we produced, the lead-in sentence for these bullets said that the Transportation and Connectivity Working Group recommends these contextual principles as guidelines for transportation planning in Reston, adapted to its residential and commercial areas. So that was the lead-in to emphasize it was, more aspirational than obviously it isn't a statement of what is there now.
Right.
I think the problem is that principles are not always understood as aspirations.
Right.
Principles are understood more as requirements or basic rules. I think the use of the indicative in the bullet points connected with the connotations of principle is the difficulty. So we're using indicative factual statements in the bullets, but we're calling them principles. But you're understanding principles as aspirations. I think we need to relook at perhaps principles, either that or the verb form in the bullets.
Can I make a suggestion? And that is, I think that Jennifer and John Carter have heard the issues that our respective vision on how it should be written, what the issues are. Let them figure out a way of changing the introduction or changing the words or whatever to accomplish the point. Because I think we're all agreeing on the same thing. That's where we want to end up. It's just a question of expressing it so that a common reader coming along reads it, doesn't say, oh gosh, they're already there.
No. And I agree. I think each section is going to have principles, is my guess. We already have principles at the very beginning of the comp plan, so they're all going to have to follow the same format. They're either all going to be, the aspirational version or what we wish to be. And we'll have to make them consistent throughout the entire document at once.
And making the verbs consistent or adding a better sentence to lead in is I think we can handle that.
Right.
I didn't object to any of the comments that we made. I just was thinking about how to do it. And I think that last comment was the way. Jennifer and I can do it. And then you all can be the judge.
Right. So I guess the important one here is the addition of this bullet. Does anyone have comments? Because it will have a section if we add this bullet, and I want to make sure that people are okay with that. Do you want to see the section?
Yeah.
All in red. And when I scroll, do you guys, I have your guys' face all over my screen. Do you see my box with everyone's faces? Or do you guys just see the Word document?
I actually can't see anything.
There's both.
Okay, because I can just reduce this box so that I don't have to keep moving it and blocking everyone's view. Okay, so this is Bill's addition related to that bullet.
I would say that bullet and the climate and transportation planning paragraph absolutely belong in this. I'm not sure what people will think of us if we don't put it in.
Yeah. Let me ask this: is anyone opposed to the inclusion of this, either the bullet or the subsequent text?
I guess I'd like to have time to read this entire text because this is brand new here as we're, getting to the close tonight. Like, no new gas station should be built in Reston. I'd sure like to think about that and the details of what Bill's put in here.
Okay.
I mean, maybe
I think
Bill, did you send us
we should
earlier?
accept that. I think we should accept the fact of the section and talk about the details of the section later.
I agree with that.
There might be a better place for this paragraph. If we have an environmental section, it might be better to put this paragraph in that environmental section.
Right.
Than sort of hiding it in the transportation. But again, maybe it would be best to leave it here for now and wait till the environmental section comes out.
What is this about no new gas stations should be built in Reston?
Okay.
We're thinking about years from now.
I think it's a common sense proposition. They're going to try and get to remove all the gasoline powered vehicles by 2050 is the general public goal. It won't be achieved, but there are plenty of gas stations around without needing new ones.
Okay.
Well,
here's
what I
Should put that in though.
We'll have a new comp plan by 2050, certainly.
Many.
And you should put the date in, not just say no new gas stations. You should put in the date if that's the case.
Are there too few now?
Let me speak as chair. We have less than 5 minutes until the end of our allotted time. I think Gary's point is understandable. People haven't had a chance to read this. Let's not make I would ask us not to make a decision on this tonight. Let people read it, and we'll take off. We'll begin again where we left off. Is that acceptable?
That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
It is. I'll just say the same thing again. I think climate change ought to have its own chapter, and these things ought to be grouped in that chapter rather than try to hide it in an obscure paragraph in the transportation. Seems like it doesn't get its fair attention. But
okay,
agree with that. Environmental chapter. That's what you're saying, John.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yeah.
So, and Bill Pedman might agree with that as well. Just jumping in to get Bill to say something, but
that's fine with me. Transportation is a major source of CO2, and that was why I wanted to say something in here as we're talking about planning transportation, a chapter making the general proposition in a statement of principles or something, and then having a separate chapter cross-referencing the chapter would be fine.
Okay. We are 2 minutes before our time, and we need to make a work plan schedule decision. In the revised version I sent out this afternoon, early this afternoon, I changed the dates as I indicated at the beginning of the meeting, and I proposed an additional meeting of this subcommittee on the 13th of April in order to be able to polish up a final version for final consideration by the task force. Jan cannot make the 13th. So let's not try to I will send out an independent email to you all asking for a viable additional meeting, okay? We're not gonna calendar at this point of the meeting. So be alert to that and please get back to me, okay?
Sounds good.
Okay. Jennifer?
John, if you know how to use Doodle, Doodle's a pretty handy way of doing it.
Okay, and I've used it, but I've not initiated it, Bill. So, plus I don't have everyone's email. That's a problem. All I have is listserv, and listserv addresses a whole bunch of folks. Anyway, we'll figure it out. Maybe I'll work with you, Bill, to do Doodle somehow. Okay. Jennifer, is there anything you would like to say as we close this portion of the meeting to make your and John's work easier?
I would say, Burton, if there are things that you want to change, it might be easier to just go ahead and change them. I'm afraid that we're not going to get to your pieces if we don't, or I would say,
I'll take a stab at that.
Yeah. Or
I had the
people
same
need to
thought,
read
Burton.
Could I
your
wait
email.
until you send out this version that you're working on, and then I'll take a stab at plugging my changes in.
Sure, I will send it out right after the meeting.
Thank you, Jennifer, for this enormous task that you've undertaken and done so well so far. John Carter, thank you.
Could we all just send our emails to you?
That would be wonderful. My email is, if you don't know it already, is jrmooney7@gmail.com. jrmooney7@gmail.com.
No, just send you our emails.
Thank you. Is there any additional business that we have to handle tonight? If not, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Jan.
Second.
Is that Burton? That Burton?
That was Burton.
It was Burton.
Yes, it was.
All right. Is there anyone foolish enough to vote nay? Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night. Thanks so much, Jen.
Everybody.
Bye now.
Thank you.